4th of July weekend, Joe and I canoed the Zumbro River. On the first day, we started in Zumbro Falls and then went about 14-15 miles downriver and camped on a sandbar downriver from Millville. If it's a nice day in the summer, this section of the river is going to see a lot of activity. There's going to be people kayaking and floating downriver. As you can imagine, if people are floating down tubes this section of the river, the paddling isn't that difficult. There's some little class 1 rapids at most, and there are also some trees in the river that you do need to avoid. On the second day, we went about 16-ish miles, and we're aiming to camp downriver from the Zumbro River bottoms. Compared to the first day where we had lots of people on the river kayaking and tubing, today we saw almost nobody. We saw like one guy fishing and a few people when we passed through the Zumbro River bottoms. Since there were way fewer people, we saw a lot more wildlife and things that we wouldn't normally see. When we would come around the corner and see a sandbar, quite often we would see these large turtles scrambling to get down into the river. I didn't even really know that turtles could move that fast. In terms of river conditions, very similar to the first day. Not really any rapids, but there were a fair amount of trees in the river that you did have to get around. Day 3 was probably the longest day, probably 17-18 miles. It was also the hardest day because the closer you got to the Mississippi, the wider the river got and the more shallow it got. shallow enough that in places we had to walk the canoe when we got really close to the Mississippi. The funny part about that is we checked the water levels before we started, and according to the DNR, it said the water level in Zumbro Falls was low and the water level in Kellogg was medium. So you would have thought if we were going to run into any problems with low water, it would have been in the beginning. And the water was low on the first 20-30 miles, but it wasn't low enough that we scraped bottom, really. So you can do this trip easily in 3 days and 2 nights. Third day, when you reach Alma, you can pull out at the boat launch there. But we chose to camp one more night. There's a lot of little backwaters across the river from Alma that were really great for fishing and seeing wildlife, and we just wanted to relax one more evening. Unfortunately for us, after a nice pleasant dinner, the weather changed and thunderstorms rolled in, and it was windy and just threatening to take down the tent. So make sure if you're down here in the summer, you pay attention to the weather. You really don't want to be out there during a really bad thunderstorm. Praying that the tent would hold up during the thunderstorm was the only blemish on the weekend. I had an amazing time. We saw lots of animals. It was relaxing. It was a hot weekend and we were able to go swimming in the river. I highly recommend canoeing the Zumbro River.